Call this meeting to order. This is the Budget and Finance Committee meeting. Welcome. Let's go around the table and emphasize for the record. John, let's start with you.
John Weddleton.
Felix Rivera.
Tim Steele. Eric Croft.
Forrest Dunbar. Pete Peterson.
Amy Demboski.
Dick Training.
Mike Chadwick, internal audit.
Lance Wilbur. Robert Harris.
Okay. We've got the agenda in front of us. We've gone through introductions. Mr. Harris, item number 3, only financial status.
Thank you.
You'll only be with us for about 20, 30 minutes, then you've got to run next door for another meeting.
So I was going to just touch on a couple of quick things. This would be the part of the meeting where I would typically say that the finances of the city are fine. And indeed,
Okay, we're done now.
and indeed, I think I can say the finances of the city are fine. I'll talk. I know there's a work session tomorrow on SAP stabilization, so we'll have some more to discuss there tomorrow. But we are bringing a new system online, and with it, there are always some challenges. I'm very proud to say, though, that the staff of the municipality is working very diligently, both from the payroll side, from the purchasing side, HCM, and Philo, to make sure all those parts and pieces are working. So we're sort of right knee deep, neck deep. We're using the snorkel, whatever it takes to make sure that we can continue to manage the finance of the city, that people get paid properly, they get paid on time, that when we have a bill that's due to somebody, we pay them on time, and so that the business of the municipality continues. So we're working diligently to make sure that happens, and just delighted about the work of staff. We have a lot of people working long hours to address those issues, and I think we'll have more to talk about that tomorrow. Dan Moore, our treasurer, this would be the part where I would typically hand it off to him and say, kind of give us an update on where we're at financially.
For tomorrow, I'll be interested in the question, I'll say this awkwardly, but have we signed off or released the contractor from any system or component that we're having trouble with in the implementation phase?
That might be a better question for Mr. Thurn, but we still have some work that the contractor is obligated.
You can answer that tomorrow.
Yes,
He
okay.
just wanted to give you the question today.
Thank you, yes.
Yeah, and
Okay.
if there's a better way to phrase my question more accurately,
Well,
whatever.
in the project world, it'd be, have we done the project handover yet? And so I think that in basic terms, the answer is yes. We still have some things they're finishing up for us, but Alden can speak to that.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Harris.
Thank you, sir. Just in general overall, though, the finances of the city are fine. We're still AAA rated. That's all good. Revenue-wise, we had a couple of things that have shown positive variances since the last report you received a month ago. There was more in terms of PFD garnishments that we received. That's about a $728,000 improvement. That's offset by a couple of areas where we didn't do as well as we had estimated. One of them is motor vehicle registration tax. That's down about $153,000, and transit bus fares are down by about $112,000. But overall, we're up by about $366,000 from what we had estimated last month, going forward through the end of the year.
Questions for Mr. Harris? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So with respect to the collections from the PFD garnishments, are you saying we're up from your estimate? Are we up from pre-PFD cut 2 years ago? See, it's really hard to benchmark over last year because last year it was cut too, but if
Right.
we go back to pre-PFD stealing, how are we faring?
So we are over our estimate. So we had experienced the decline from last year that the PFD had been set, and then half of that was vetoed. And we use that as the baseline for estimating what we thought we would bring in this year.
Oh, so we used last year's
Yes, that's what
lower
we
number. Okay.
Yeah, it was the sort of fairly conservative number when we were putting together our estimates for this year. We figured last year would be as good a model as anything. I don't think the dollar amount of the PFD changed appreciably. I think what happened was we probably moved up a little farther in the queue as far as being able to access the money that's owed to us. So that's, I think, really the genesis of where most of the additional $728,000 has come in. That was, it was unexpected. It was higher than we had estimated.
Other questions from Assembly members, Mr. Harris? Okay, Robert, continue or not? There's no questions for you, sir.
Okay. No, I think I'm done. We're continuing to watch marijuana tax revenues. It's continuing to grow. I don't have a predictor right now for where we're going to end up on the year, except to say I think we expect to make our numbers for the year, and we'll continue to watch that for next year.
What was that estimate, just generally?
Right now, let's see, I think we are, our monthly tax revenues are in about the $120,000 a month for the state, I think. So let me find that. Year-end revenues are projected to be about $1.5 million for the municipality. It started out low because we saw this delay in getting the program kicked off at the state level and then within the municipality as a result of that. But it's starting to ramp up now.
Yes, Mr. Belsky.
Mr. Harris, I don't know when the contract comes back up, and the last I checked, I think we were doing really good on it, but when it comes to collections, specifically collections for the fire department, how is that contract faring? How are they doing on their collection basis?
I haven't, Lance, I don't know if you.
So, Mr. Belsky, you're right there. The contract is, I know that there was a review of it. I'll find out the status from the chief of purchasing, and I will let you know.
Yeah, because we had a little rough spell when this contract first started, but I think they rectified the issue and actually performed really well, but I'm thinking that contract is just about, I can't remember when it's due.
I'll find out the status.
All right, thanks.
I'm sorry to be stupid. Oh,
Sorry,
good.
Mr. Peterson. Now some more to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so I believe that our original estimate when we were doing the budget a year ago was in the vicinity of $3 million revenue coming in from marijuana.
Right.
But we got such a low late start or slow start that we were actually hoping to end up with somewhere around half of that.
Right. And then I think somewhere in the middle of the year, we adjusted that, recognizing that we thought the number was going to be closer to about $1.5 million.
Right.
So, yeah, we had hopes it would be $3 million, and
High hopes.
yes, I avoided saying that.
That's
We
small.
so close, but you know, it's nice to see that industry segment doing well and providing benefit to the people of Anchorage.
Thank you.
Mr. Croft, sir.
Yeah, sorry for interjecting. Collections from what? I should know, but on fire, how do
fire, so it's ambulance transports primarily.
medical insurance will sometimes cover that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Medicaid too. But we've in the past had issues with, it's a third party that does the collections. And we had the same third party for a long time, and then they switched vendors. And that first year was really, really, really tough.
That makes sense, thanks.
I guess that's a nice way to put it.
Other questions from assembly members? I want to thank you for one thing. We're going over this introduction of this gasoline tax, and I saw in there the Treasury is going to request no additional funding. Your projection, are you able to collect it without any increase in the size of government? I appreciate that. Want to make sure there is no increase.
That's my
Thank you,
understanding.
Robert. Thanks. Have a good meeting over there.
Thank you.
Lance, you're next, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So let's start with 2017. We have a couple departments that are still yet to submit their year-end projections, but right now, all of the departments are between 96 and 99.8% spent. So right now, I think as a group, we're going to be on the positive side. They've been managing their monies very well. I have one or two departments that I'm working with them to make sure that they're taking advantages of the grants that they have, whether they're state or federal, to make sure that they're any opportunity they can to move those funds or those eligible cost of grants, which would then they would be spending all their tax dollars. I'm working with a couple departments on that. I feel confident that overall, municipality and general government, they're going to make a budget. So hopefully I'll be able to, when I get those other departments coming in, 2017 is looking pretty good. For 2018, as you know, we have a work session tomorrow, Mr. Chairman. Maybe I could just sort of give you a preview of what the approach would be. We're scheduled tomorrow to start at 12:30. I know that you guys are going to be busy before that. We're going to go to 4:30, and that's a long stretch. In the event that we don't get everything done, we have a meeting on the 27th And for those departments that we don't get to, we can pick those up on the 27th. But generally, this is how I expect tomorrow, I'd like to present tomorrow. So we're going to start off with a couple slides of an overview of the budget that I mentioned before. We'll talk about the revenues, the personnel, the changes that we made collectively by department, and I'll share that with you sort of right off the top of the first 4 or 5 slides. Then we're going to go into the departments specifically. I'm going to start with those departments that are under the municipal manager. So basically from 12:30 to around 2 o'clock, we'll do police, fire, health, transit, streets, employee relations, and those departments, and those will take up the first portion of the presentation, and we'll take a break. And then set the second presentation up, and then we're going to start with Chris Judy's under Economic and Community Development. We'll go to his group, Parks, Planning, Real Estate, the Library. We'll work with those guys shortly after 2 o'clock, and then we'll conclude with Mr. Harris and his folks. We'll have Robert, Public Finance. We'll move into IT, Finance, and all the departments that are under Finance, which is the Controller, the Treasurer, Property Appraisal. And then we'll conclude with Purchasing. After that, as time permits, we'll go to the Mayor, OMB, and the Assembly budget. Those departments, the reason I put those at the back end, and in the event that we are running short on time, we can move those easily to next week since all of those departments are inside this house. And honestly, I think on the 27th, we will not need all of the time for the utilities, the complete 4 hours. So that's the plan. I'll lead the discussions on the budget. I'll have the executive managers with me. Any questions that you might have, we'll take those and then work with the department heads to get a response to you. But that's generally the layout for tomorrow. It will be mostly on the budget. It's basically the budget itself. The revenue pieces, the gas tax, certificate of participation, that won't be part of my presentation. I know that there'll be parts of that as well. So that's the plan for tomorrow. I've been working with Rose to work on the schedule and the order in which we do that. So hopefully that'll be beneficial and useful for you. And if it's not, then we'll adjust.
Lance, just a couple things before I go for questions. I asked you when we started this, I want a list of those positions that are vacant that are being cut. I also want a list of those positions that are filled that are being eliminated. By department, I want to know exactly whose job is being put on the street if in fact they approve this budget.
So the sheet that I have prepared for you is by department, the number of personnel they have in 2016 or in 2017, any change they would have in 2018, and then there's a note on the side that says it's a filled, full-time, eliminated, OMB analyst or something like that.
That's what I want to
It won't
know.
have the name or the PCN, it'll just have the position title. And then that way, if you guys make any changes or adjustments, those things will get changed and adjusted.
That's
will
fine.
be the
Sometimes
detail.
when government cuts, they always put a list of all the vacant positions they cut. I appreciate that, but I also want to know live bodies, because we're affecting people's lives.
There'll be 3 types, 4. There'll be full-time filled, full-time vacant, part-time filled, part-time vacant.
Thank you.
So that's what will happen.
Another thing, I was looking at where the budgets are bigger than some of the departments got last year. I want to know why their budget has increased over last year. My biggest concern is IT. Because when I look at how they're like taking a 28% increase. Now that may be the cost of SAP.
Yep.
But we need to explain to assembly members why some of the departments like, oh heavens, Shooty's area have taken an increase over last year. I want to know so we can explain to our members what's happening.
I'm anticipating most of those questions because I think I've heard most of them, so I'll provide that in my briefing. And then if I don't answer your questions, I will certainly get back to you.
Decided I'd tell you up front.
Yeah, the SAP one, mostly that's the depreciation loaded into the IT's budget.
Mr. Littlefield.
Kind of following up on that a little bit, I was reading AEDC has a little report, and it gives growth in employment, et cetera, and so on. It says local government was plus, I don't remember the number, but it was like over 100
Right.
positions. I'm going, well, we don't see that. We're the only local government here, right?
Yeah, actually, no. In that analysis, we are not the only local government. They include the school district. They include a variety of other things in there. So, Mr. Reynolds, I have a summary of where those jobs are coming from, and I will share that with you. It's not just all from us. Mr. Harris has something.
Right, I think to answer that question, that was AEDC, I think, had a presentation But within that SIC code for what they consider local government, they throw a whole bunch of stuff in. The only growth we had for last year was in the number of police.
That's what I understand. It wasn't 200.
No, I think they include some nonprofits, some other sort of organizations that don't have a home in some other industry building.
Mr. Steele, sir.
Excuse me. Do we need to bring our budget books for that presentation tomorrow, or are you going to have handouts that are
Unless you
appropriate
want to.
for it? Or
So the handouts I'll have prepared for you are copies of the slides. I've also prepared a map for you of all of the capital improvement projects, all on one sheet of paper, so that you can see where all the capital improvements are. And for Eagle River, I have a list of where those capital improvement projects are, so I'll share both of those with you. So obviously, bring your book if you want to flip through with specific questions, and then otherwise we'll deal with them later.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from Assembly members? Okay. Well, if there's nothing, thank you, Lance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Should be a good day tomorrow.
You're ready.
Okay, we're now down to Joe Riggs from our Budget Advisory Committee. Sir,
I didn't know if I should.
come on up.
I didn't know if I should sit at the big people's table or not. I wanna take
Just
one-
don't drool.
Yeah, I got my dip.
We don't run away.
But, you know, it was a pretty light day at BAC last month. After our normal briefings from the various departments, we had presentations by our two new committees, one the AFD committee and one is the cumulative debt committee. Both of them are just finishing coordinator getting together and starting to collect some data, so there was really no review there. The rest of our time was trying to determine what direction we're going to go in, and that's kind of an ongoing discussion. We're always obviously open to suggestions on where you'd like us to point. That's it. I'm not going to take a lot of your time.
I have one.
Ms.
Maybe
Grabowski.
it's because I served on the BAC and I've seen some of the work we've done in the past. One thing that I've missed over the last couple of years, I really liked it when you guys spot checked different departments and you did actual substantive interviews and you could talk with the departments. During the budget process, I think it's really helpful for us. I mean, I remember when we were on it, I think you were on it at the time. We were one of the first groups that actually pointed out the defaults and the challenges with SAP. And I remember.
Why didn't you fix them?
Well, can I tell you?
Right.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we raised the flag, and that was before anybody else was really talking about it. So I think those are valuable, whether it's the Parks Department and they're having challenges with, vandalism, or these are the various issues, or whether it's something else. It's helpful to have an independent glimpse of what's going on within the city. I personally kind of miss that.
I completely agree with you. That's one of the reasons why we started the AFD committee, is just to try to continue on that without taking on the entire city and every department. I'm always open to the way it used to be when we take a look at all the departments. But if you have specific areas you'd like us to take a peek at, that would be most helpful. As you can imagine, we've got a lot of new members here, and they all have different ideas of what we should try to do, and we're trying to steer the ship right now.
Question from Assembly members? I just want to thank you for bringing the fuel tax forward to us, and we are taking it forward. Mayor and I are reducing it on Tuesday, and we appreciate you guys working on this, because far too often what you do, I think you feel it's ignored by people that are lawmakers. And in this case, we're not ignoring it, we're paying attention. I appreciate your work on it.
We'll be there to provide testimony.
That will be on the meeting of the 7th of November.
It's on my books. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for being here, sir.
That's fine.
Alden, we have the rest of the time for you.
But normally it seems to add up to, well, it doesn't. Thank you, Chairman Trainee. Just to give everybody a little bit of an update on the project status, of the wind down of the project status phase of SAP, which is basically occurring here during the month of October. We've had additional consultants and SAP leadership, team leads, that kind of stuff, continue to roll off the project as they finished up some of their tasks and responsibilities. The next major roll-off is next Friday. We have about half of the remaining people rolling off at that particular point that were associated with the project, and SAP leadership will be on at that point as well, that have helped manage all the way up to this particular point. We'll be doing the computer de-escalation of usages from 155. You'll have your room back in November. That's my plan. 155.
Carpeted, painted, new sound system.
New
More
furniture.
outlets than you had before. I can guarantee that.
Let's just exchange cord across the ground.
We did put a lot more outlets in there.
It needs to be
some duct-
fumigated,
and you have some duct
too.
tape on the floor if you want to keep that. You can certainly keep that. And we're going to move the remaining consultants' computers and so forth into the old credit union facility, and we've got some people. When you're working remote, you still have to have a machine here to be able to log into, so we're going to be using that facility, but you will have the room back. As far as from a project standpoint, where we're at, if you remember when we took the system into production on October 2nd, that was a data conversion that basically had everything through 2016 at that point in time. So the first thing that the municipal staffs had to do was close September, and that took, they did it in half the time they normally do. It was about a little over a week, or a little less than a week actually, to be able to get that done. Once and that's basically closing September third quarter as well for 2017. So over the last several weeks, we did keep on the cutover manager and the back office associates, which was the company that was doing the data conversion loads, to help us work with the municipal staffs to load the 2017 first 3 quarters of data into the system. All of those data files have been loaded, with the exception of the last part right now, which is P&L, profit and loss. Those are the last files to be loaded. We have operating and non-operating files on the municipal side. And with everything, as you remember through data conversion, we've had some challenges, and we want to make sure that we balance as well, because that affects everything downstream, ultimately ending up at FERC with the utilities. So on the MOA side, we currently have 9 issues we're dealing with in the operating and 8 in the non-operating, and that's probably out of 17,000 transactions. But we need to make sure that they're right, and so we were hoping to be done with that on this last Sunday. We're still working on them. We probably have a day or 2 left before we get some of those worked out. The non-operating are fairly complex, and it had to do with POs and how much money and funding. And remember, we're dealing with all of the financial transactions that have happened in this first 9 months of the year. So with that being said, the 2 utilities are completely done and balanced, and their information is loaded on those 2 things. And we're hopeful that by the end of the day, we'll have the operating side of the muni done on profit and loss, and probably the next day or 2 to get the non-operating one done. Those are the last files that have to be loaded by this back office company, using their tools and so forth to be able to do that. So while we were a little bit behind where we'd like to be, a few days from what we had planned, we will certainly have plenty of time to get these last couple of files loaded in advance of them rolling off even next week, and potentially even have them roll off earlier and save a little bit of money on that side. Balance sheets, everything has all been loaded, and when we say loaded now, before it used to be loaded into a test environment, we're loaded into production, which means the moment they load it into production, it's usable by everybody that's out there. So all the different things have been loaded in. After we do that, all files have been loaded. There will be some settlements, some depreciations, a few other journal entries and so forth. We're hoping to make some progress on those next week, but even if we have to go longer, technically we have all the way through the rest of the year to get those things done. But because we were a couple days late, we asked all the utilities and so forth to go ahead, and they can do January through August. So they're actually currently, rather than waiting for the MOA to close on their pieces, they're actually going and doing their first 8 periods of the year reconciliations and closing. So we kind of brought some stuff next week into this week. You've seen us do it before to kind of keep on track. We do move things around and so forth to make up for any lapses that we may have. So we think we're gonna be pretty good shape. But plus the utilities, they like to get a jump on it, because ultimately, as soon as these other 2 files get loaded in there, they're going to want to get to their FERC, and that's really important to them. And they'll close out the 9th period, in this case September, and we'll be able to move forward on that. So from a cutover perspective, we are, as usual, on time, on budget. And we're going to be right where we need to be to close it out next week. Those people will then roll off, and then there will be nobody left on a capital basis, I guess, capital planning basis. Those will be the last group of consultants that are on there. All the remaining consultants that are in the production environment are on the operating side at that particular point. And we'll take the computers back, give you your room back. We have lots of work on invoices to go. As you're well aware, invoicing is lags quite a bit. In fact, the good news is I have my first invoice on my desk today for the July, which is the first time when we get to start charging them against that $5 million that we negotiated a few months ago. So this $1.3 million invoice will be free to the municipality of Anchorage, and then the next one for August, which is over $2 million, and so forth until we use up that $5 million investment credit, however you want to refer to it. So we have finally got to that, but there are still probably 30 invoices that are outstanding. A few of the vendors that were on the project, their contracts and POs are closed, so we're finishing them and taking them off the project as well right now. So it's kind of a cleanup phase on the accounting side of it, and then we're finishing up the cut over 2017 as expected, and then at that point, all the data that we were going to get into the system will be there, and of course, in the production environment, they've been put October into the system, so there won't be anything from people. So this basically what it also means is that no one is entering any more information in PeopleSoft. That stopped several weeks back. So that's why we closed the PeopleSoft first 3 quarters, and then it needs just to be shifted to SAP at that point. So that's basically what the project side has been working on over the last several weeks, and trying to keep on track and resolve some things.
Thank you, Mr. Dombrowski.
Thank you. So Alden, what is the overall actual spend versus what's been approved?
We actually did a review of that. I think it's gonna come in a few $100,000 below what's been authorized or approved by the administration, but we're gonna be able to, look and use that money to offset any other, things that might have popped up over here in the last few weeks or something like that. But we're under the authority or the appropriation of the Senate.
Do you have a ballpark in your head?
Well, you've appropriated about $81.4 million, I think, and we'll probably be just slightly over $81 million. It's hard to say because the one big caveat is SAP bills 45 days after the month, and then it takes 2 months to kind of reconcile it. So we had some huge overtime for July, August, and September by SAP to be able to meet our date that we were shooting for. So I have an estimate of that until the actual invoices come through and how that affects it, but it's certainly been my plan and my goal all along to make sure that I'm under the amount that's been appropriated. I know Mrs. France, if she was here, she'd be asking me that same exact question, but it looks like based upon where we're at, we're going to come in right at the appropriation number that you've given us.
With the cutoff of PeopleSoft now and the transition, is there anything that's been understated or not accounted for in that calculation you have?
No, I mean, we are using the cutover work that we're doing right now, even though that's after our October 2nd, because it's related to data getting into the system, we are using that against the project capital, and I think that's a legitimate expense that can be used. That was not something I had planned, at least when it came to the assembly in July for the additional funding, but we'll be able to cover that particular amount of money. We did have some significant new labor charges that were probably higher than I had budgeted, but we'll be able to maintain that within that number as well. As Mr. Things are going on my head here. As Robert mentioned earlier, the municipal staffs have been putting in, as they have done all along, excessive amounts of time. And that was certainly seen in July, August, and September, and they're able to charge the project for that, and that certainly did use up some additional capital funds that I had out there unencumbered and so forth. But we were still able to bring the project in at its number, even with that additional charge. So there were additional charges that were unintended, but I still was able to handle those within the appropriation.
With respect to the internal municipal charges, can you give us a ballpark at how much that was that you didn't anticipate ate away from your budget?
Well, we had budgeted $250,000 a month for July, August, and September, and the months have all been around $320,000. So it was a lot. have to remember, they were doing testing and data conversion and just a lot of different things. And they continue to do that now when they're doing their regular jobs, plus trying to deal with any defects that might be coming up. But though, in October, we have not charged any time to the capital at that point. We'd only budgeted through September, but it was more than I had anticipated needing, and it was also seen on the consultant side, as I mentioned. SAP alone put 1,400 hours of overtime in that I had not anticipated, just to be able to get through all the work that had to be done to have a system that we could bring on in September and October.
That leads to my final question, since basically the numbers were through September, what is your projected spend in October, and do you anticipate anything after October?
I had budgeted, as I mentioned, for this data cut over $266,000. It might actually come in less, as I mentioned. That was all 5 of those people going through the next Friday, and we have a potential of rolling some, or if not all of them, off in advance of that. So there's a potential of saving a little bit of money there, but a little over $250,000 I had. That is going to be project-related October expense. I'm able to maintain it within the budget that we have, but after that, it would be, I don't have any additional consultants or anybody else currently being charged the project beyond that. And
So-
those capital contracts, and I'll cover in more detail, but those contracts that are capital related are actually, those POs are closed. And the new contracts for the post-production support are all from the operating budget. They were brand new contracts that were started. So I'm actually closing the stuff out that we have. For example, the Peloton contract
Yeah.
that's been around for a long time, that one here, I've got one bill on my thing, and when that one's done, then that PO will be closed.
Okay, I know we have a SAP meeting after this,
Tomorrow, I believe, is
but I just want to ask really quick. So with our going live now and this being transitioned, I understand there's a management change going on. Can you care to elaborate?
Basically, I've maintained anything to do with the project at that particular point in time, and that's what I'm giving you the update on. And Robert will be able to talk about the production environment tomorrow. And that pretty much happened on October 2nd, that kind of transitional switch.
So you're no longer leading the project itself, because the project's just going into like a maintenance phase? I don't understand
Well,
exactly.
The production environment is led by Robert. The project environment is what I'm currently finishing up, so to speak.
Okay, so when you're finished, what happens then? Where do you go?
Sure.
Let Robert answer that first.
I was going to
Not
talk
answer
about what
that
Alden's
question.
going to do next, Mr. Bob, Madam Chair.
It's a pretty big project, that's why I'm asking, because I'm a little nervous when I see
Certainly, so.
things like this change.
Typically, in a project like this, a large, complex engineering task project, if you will, the project team comes in, they do their build, they do their work, and when they're done, they hand it over to operations. So they've handed it over to operations. I am the senior executive for SAP operations, so I have a team of, we'll talk about this tomorrow, but basically operating from the FILO side, HCM, SRM, and payroll. So all those departments, which typically, if everything's running great, you never hear about it. So we're trying to get to that steady state mode in some short duration of time where people will just get their paychecks, we'll just pay our bills, and there's be no muss, no fuss. But right now we have an operations committee and an operations leadership team that I'm the senior executive. I'm leading that effort, and I've got representatives from the departments as well as the utilities that sit on it that are contributing towards the question of what priorities do we have, what's the number one problem to fix right now, and by nature then, what are priorities that we can take care of in a month or two. Right now, payroll is one of our highest priorities. We want to make sure payroll is right each and every time. So we're focusing resources on that and giving people an opportunity to be able to work on defects, identifying them, identifying things that were asked for during the project change requests that were either deferred or not done. We're looking at those as well for where they would be in terms of priority. And basically asking the question, how do we get from where we're at now to a steady state model in 5 to 6 months where we're satisfied with the essential functionality of the system we've purchased.
So let me ask you this. It sounds to me like clearly you're the executive manager of what is going to effectively
Yes.
become SAP, right?
Right.
Or the whole system. Who's the IT expert? Who's the person that is, I know in the past when I've had specific IT questions, I'd ask Alden.
Right.
So who's gonna be your point? Because clearly, you're a finance guy and a manager, not an IT guy, so I'm trying to understand who's really, who you're gonna be relying on.
Certainly. So the way to think about this model of the system going forward is that there's a couple of core components. One of them is the IT piece, namely maintaining the software, logging defects, keeping all that in track. So we have, for the problems that have cropped up, we've identified a process of essentially project management where we're tracking and logging each and every defect, no matter how big or how small, so that we don't lose track of it. Within that, though, layered on top of that, are the functional responsibilities that an IT person's not going to be expected to know how a general ledger operation works, or how a shopping cart necessarily works that purchasing is using, or how a payroll piece is working and how the time piece of the payroll works. So there's a team approach that's being used to try to make sure that all of the resources, all the people that need to be having a discussion about what the problems are and how to fix them are all in the room at the same time. The other thing we're doing since the launch of SAP, since the go live beginning in September and perhaps more beginning on October 2nd, is we're having daily meetings, sometimes twice a day, sometimes multiple meetings with just focused on SRM, just focused on Philo, so that today's defect comes right to the front of the list if you have a chance to talk about it as a large team, so that you're able to get an answer right away rather than have something kind of disappear into a void where a problem exists, people don't hear about it. So we're sort of using those basic project management techniques you'd expect to use as we sort of roll this implementation forward.
So the question you didn't answer that you said you'd answer is what Alden's doing next.
I don't have the answer for that. I will defer that to Alden.
Are you leaving the city?
The state, actually.
I'm just asking.
Are you running?
I honestly don't know, and it seems cryptic.
Put me on the
Sorry,
spot.
you don't have to answer if you don't want. It seemed cryptic, so I was just asking.
I am the deputy municipal manager, so there might be other projects in the city that might need my attention and so forth. So I've been told I'm still in the budget for next year. I think the work that I'll be doing is probably still to be determined.
Okay.
So we look to Liz tomorrow and deputy municipal manager go
I'll know exactly what I
We'll
need
know
for
what's
that.
happening.
Yeah, and the last
Alden, we
thing,
appreciate working with you.
since payroll came up,
One final thing.
I'm sure you already know this, but thank you, Mr. Constant, for bringing my attention to it. I did look, and I was overpaid last pay period. And I know our office has a request into payroll to see if that was right, because it sounds like there's multiple assembly members who fell into this category.
There's no
So,
debate.
there was multiple that got paid too much. So I just want to know, we haven't gotten our answer yet, if it
How
was
did that happen?
intentional, if it was not intentional, if it's like they're prepaying all our health care at once. But we would really like it if you guys could
You
give
get
us an
healthcare?
answer.
So I don't know that I'll have an answer for you tomorrow. Typically, we would want to deal with individual personnel pay matters individually.
I think a lot of us don't.
I'm happy to share that in my case, I was overpaid because there were deductions that weren't taken out of my paycheck. So they'll be taken out this paycheck tomorrow. And
So
yeah,
I don't have to
so-
cut you a check if you just didn't take my deductions. I just
Yes.
If
What
I
we'll
might
do
pay
is-
the IRS later.
What we'll do is, we'll find the error. Of course, if you want to, give us a heads up, I'll make a note.
I
here.
just gave it to you, so
Thank you.
please
I'll take
help
care of
us
it.
understand.
So,
As did Mr. Constant, as did Mr. Rivera, as did Mr. Peterson.
yes,
Did you get paid much?
it was,
I
it
didn't
was.
look at
I don't either.
I didn't-
You gotta go back and look. I know
The
it.
small
Did I even get
consolation
paid?
here is
Am I
that
getting paid?
I'm thankful that people were paid at least what they were owed. We were very concerned on October 6th that we hadn't paid enough people enough to make them, so that they'd be able to take care of their bills that pay period. We were very worried about that. So I'm pleased that, we erred on the side of the positive. We'll fix that mistake as time goes on, and certainly dig into what pay corrections are needed and why, and how the system, was, when it was configured, didn't have the right deductions or pay codes or whatever. We have had a fairly large number by payroll standards of those kinds of issues, but the great part is that when people aren't paid enough, they tell us, and now when people are paid too much, they tell us. So things are working well.
I wasn't there, no.
You know, we've got just a tremendous crew of people in payroll and HCM that are working to try to make this right. And I'm, you know,
I just don't, I feel bad if I have to give you a check, I'll give you a check. I don't wanna feel like I'm stealing from somebody.
You know
Give
what,
me the
fine,
check,
you-
I'll
and,
pull a name
and
in,
I'll
I'll take care of it for
we'll
you.
get it corrected, and my
Mr. Dyson,
apologies
sir.
for the errors, we are working to fix them all. Thank you.
Mr. Dyson?
Thank you. I purposely haven't paid much attention to this whole thing, because being at the tail end of it. But I'm deducing that the contractors, the people we have employed, you know, other than MOA people, are all on a force account basis now, not under a contractual responsibility to perform.
Well, we're under a time and materials contract to be
Yeah,
able to
force account.
do that.
Yeah, it's a force account, all right, so I worry that you all were under pressure to get rid of that
Yeah, you
liability
do it too soon.
and ran those guys off the lease before there was the end of their need for their expertise. Now, I hope I'm wrong. I've been through a lot of project management and startup stuff, and this is the key place, you know, and a whole lot of stuff. I hope that the stuff I'm hearing, I'm wrong and you're right, it's as rosy as you say it is. I have a healthy, respectful
However.
skepticism, you know, and so on. But this is where the rubber hits the road, and, you know, all of us probably have heard about the payroll stuff, you know, and so on and so forth. I worry that in other systems, there are some of those kind of problems in the implementation. Push the button, doesn't run the way it's supposed to, and those aren't bubbling to the top like payroll. This business, there's no way to get people's attention quicker than on the payroll unless you turn the heat and light off. So I'm worried about it, and it's a respectful one, and I can't fix it, but it is kind of our responsibility to make doggone sure you guys have all the resources you need. I know of MOA employees that worked all the way through the weekend, kind of on an emergency basis, plugging holes in the leaky ship, you know, and I'm worried about that. And you have a lot of credibility with me and so on. Don't hide us, don't hide this stuff, and we need to be a little bit informed ahead of time, because we'll get the complaints too, you know, and so on, and want to have good answers. I can tell them there's a great team leader, but we owe it to you to make sure you got all the resources you need.
Thank you, and if I can just, I think that's a well-founded fear. It is something that we are looking at, and of course, because we're in the operations phase now, that as we've set these priorities for what we think we need to work on first, we both considering the resources we have available within the municipality, our employees, and also the folks we sort of expected to have available as we went forward. We have a couple of contracts, AMS being one of them, where we had certain expectations for the ability of those folks to help us through this transition process. So we're in this moment right now, sort of asking ourselves that question against this prioritization level of what are the key problems we have to get us to essential functionality. You know, the next piece is going to be if there's a cost-benefit analysis. If I can spend $1 and get $2 worth of benefit, I think it's incumbent upon me to bring that opportunity to it. Because at some point, what we want from this system is to begin to extract value out of it. We want to be able to do our work more efficiently. We want to be able to save money. We want to be able to consolidate from, for example, 30 programs to be able to do it with 10. I mean, that's our goal, is to be able to save money with using this program. And the sort of that last general area of essential prioritization is, are there things that we can figure a workaround and we're not going to have to spend money? So ideally, we're going to be able to give you some more information shortly, and we're still evaluating it at this time, you know, what we think the resource need would be. So I don't have an answer for you yet, but it is something we're working on.
Fred, anything else?
No, my sense is you really understand the book you're trying to write.
I understand.
And
Yeah.
I understand a little bit of the situation. I'm worried about it.
Right.
I'm worried that the guys that really have the institutional and practical knowledge have left town and left you hold the bag with people who are earnest and reliable and really scramble to catch up.
Well, we still have resources here that we expect to be here through the end of October, through the middle of November for some of those resources. So we're addressing this with haste so that we can identify what our needs are going to be going forward.
Thank you, thank you.
To put it into Fred's terms, because he's a polite gentleman, he's a mariner, and he's heading his ship into the harbor. There's rocks on both sides of the harbor. He wants you to get down the right pathway and not end up on the rocks. And that's our concern.
Right.
There are rocks out there. We're hearing about them.
Right.
Mr. Steele?
Hopefully they didn't just fall off the barge and they're in the center of the channel.
Oh.
Anyway, most of my questions were asked by Amy and by Fred, but I just want to say I hope, Alden, you're sticking around. I was concerned about your, if not physical health, mental health during this process, because it was an extremely high pressure job you had. And I think that you've done a credible job in terms of getting us through the worst part of it, hopefully. But I hope also that we've got the phone numbers for folks, and should anything come up, we're have our eyes wide open.
Kind of hit it here at the very end. I know you're worried about resources coming off, but for the most part, you've been able to keep the consultants in all those functional areas. So I know you're worried about new people coming in. I think everybody shares that same thing. But we've done as much as we could, and we'll probably try to do even more to maintain the functional consultants in the areas that our community staff have been working with to the greatest degree possible. We've had a few roll off, but that's that synergy that you're talking about, Mr. Dyson, and so forth, about how do we make sure we've got people who know it. Well, a great deal of that is keeping the consultants that have been doing it for 2.5 years to continue working with our staffs to be able to get that. The people that are rolling off tend to be the leaders or the leads, which are the SAP people, and hopefully we can manage the consultants without that leadership component, and or functional areas like in my state, the data people. We don't have more data to load. There's no need to keep those people around anymore. But in the payroll consultants, the benefits, the philo people, and so forth, the SRM, if we can keep the people that developed it, they're going to be able to help resolve the issues much faster with our muni staff, and they form those relationships already long term. So when I said we're rolling people off, we are rolling a lot, but I'm hoping that you understand we are trying to keep the critical core ones that we've been dealing with in those areas who are going to be dealing with the defects to the greatest degree possible.
Will they still be consultants, or are we going to pick up some as muni employees?
No, they're still with SAP and with Peloton, just like they always far be it free to believe that nobody wants to move to Alaska. So
that's okay with me if they don't move to Alaska and
Yeah,
everything.
that way.
There
But-
are many people, and in fact, it's actually
Short-sighted.
a challenge for us to keep them, because even though the project's done and we still want them,
Yeah.
some of them have said, you know what, I did my 2.5 years in Anchorage, I'm done. So trying to persuade them to continue to stay is a challenge. Technically speaking, at the end of next week, nobody else is supposed to travel. All the consultants will stay on from a remote offsite capability. That did allow us to keep some people a little longer than what maybe they would have if we required them to travel up. But there's a lot of them who don't want to be here in November, December, January coming up, and the only way to keep them is to have them working offsite. It's still a large number. I don't want to think that there's only 2 or 3 left. We've probably got at least 15 consultants across there that are still in the queue and still working with us and so forth. But we are losing a lot of either the global development, the back office people, or the leadership. We're all going to be gone from SAP side.
Who pays travel for those folks if they have to be on site as opposed to on the
In the future or
phone?
historically?
In the future.
In the future, it would have to be paid out of the operating budgets with IT and so forth. We would be paying travel. The project.
And per diem?
Absolutely. The project has been paying the travel costs associated with, in that 81 million, there's millions of dollars in there for travel. But think about it this way, though. All that hotel rooms and restaurants and so forth, that money, while we may have been giving it to them, has been put back into the local economy.
That's true.
To be able to do that. And we certainly try to make them fly, Alaska Airlines whenever possible and so forth.
I support Seattle.
Thank you.
Early on, you know, we made sure we kind of did them and locate the miles, yeah, that was our intention all
Thank you,
along.
Alden, for your efforts, and I'll go forward somewhat optimistic but cautious.
Just for the body, I asked the internal auditor a couple months ago to give us a breakdown how we got into this spot. So yesterday I got a sheet of papers, I'm gonna make copies for everybody tomorrow. The sad history of SAP, how we actually got here. It's an interesting story because you would have thought the previous administration would have called, I don't know, San Diego to see what their experience was. I don't know, call Portland. That was never done. So I want to give you this sheet, so when you go into community councils, and they say, how did we get here? Mike gave me the package yesterday, I will make copies of it and give it to everybody.
So this is a hit piece, is what you're telling me?
No, it's
That's what it
just how we got
sounds
here. How we
Truth hurts
got here.
sometimes.
Some names, there are no sheets of paper with the names on it, I don't know how that happened.
Is there any reference to PeopleSoft in there?
Oh, yes. SAP was not the first software by the Gardner group that was hired to select one. You can read this and you'll understand how it happened. And it's just for new members or the ones that haven't been through this whole sad story. But it's nice that you guys are getting there. We appreciate that. But I just have a couple concerns. One is lunches. Why in heaven's names do we do bean counters when they go to lunch, they've got to check out, when they come back for lunch, they check in? Why didn't we just assume our workers are honorable and they take their time, or their manager deals with that issue? Why did we go to system that requires them to check out when they leave and check in when they come back
Why
for
didn't
lunch?
they like our lunches?
That's a great question, and
I can certainly tell you, you know, we did
I
spend.
know it's a German system, but
We
why?
did spend, we had an entire group of local consultants who spent an entire year going through the contracts and all of our policies and procedures and putting together over 100-page document of the business rules that needed to be programmed into the system. Those were signed off by payroll and by the labor department before we even began blueprinting time. So I don't have a specific answer, but I can tell you what was in that document is what we programmed into the system. However, as Mr. Steele knows, I've worked for the school district for many years and so forth, and as we brought us any new system online, there's always opportunity for changes and so forth. So just because it was done one way, if that we find to be onerous or we want to make changes, we can always, you know, go in and modify the system to be able to do that. But I can't specifically say why it was that way, but I can say that that document said that that's the way it should be designed and developed, and that's what we did.
And I will keep asking you this repeatedly. You might get tired of hearing it, because from my perspective, spending years in the military with our civil service, we never did that. We saved and gave them hours to go to lunch, and if there's a problem, then the manager took care of it. We do not require them to check in and check out. That's civil service. It's a small little organization, federal government. But I've got concerns because, as I understand it, our system rounds down on their time. So we've had some of our people that spent hours. In fact, one of my clerks spent 8 hours trying to get her payroll system done correctly so she doesn't have to use leave to get to her 40 hours.
Just
I'll
a
give you
couple,
your name
couple
if you want to
comments
check it
here,
out.
and certainly Robert can talk about this tomorrow, but certainly anything new in a system is different. And the system has a rounding 7 minutes on both sides of start and end time, and I think a large portion of what you're experiencing here is different and change, and it's taken a while for people to understand why, and a lot of people never clocked in and out before ever. So I've been through several time and attendance systems, especially in a union environment, which they like it the way it's always been. I do think that some of the things that are happening right now are not that the system is doing them wrong, it's just different. And I think it's gonna take a little bit of time for some people to understand it. If it's wrong, get it fixed. But if it's different, but still allowable from what was agreed to and so forth, that's just some training, maybe some opportunity to be able to do that. Anytime that any of you hear of something that you're concerned about, if you can provide a specific name or a direction, it's much easier for us to look into any kind of an issue than saying being broad-based, because we don't really know where that's coming from. But we are always willing I'm sure there are different issues going on with the system, and we'll work through them, you know, one at a time as we go through there. But I've seen some of these, and I get some of the same phone calls, and once you explain it, they just find out, oh, that's just not the way it used to be. And that's the way I thought this was gonna be, and when we tell them it's different, they become understanding with that. And, you know, we're only 3 weeks into this, so, I think it's gonna take a little bit of time for people to get used to it, but we are paying our bills. We are paying our employees, we are doing contracts, we are maintaining business, so,
I appreciate that. My only concern is I'm expecting to spend their whole day trying to get their time sheet correct. So would you give my clerk a call, Barbara, and ask specifically on Mandy's experience with this system? Concerns me. Like I said before, we assumed in the military that we're basically honest.
And you know what they say.
We can have the
about those
manager
people
deal with
assume.
that. My only concern is we're spending time counting minutes. Yes, Pete?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And my question was sort of an extension of Mr. Steele's. He was talking, being worried about Alden being burned out, which I can certainly understand him being worried about that. But so taking that one step further, how is the Muni IT staff holding up? I mean, they were working 7 days a week, 24 hours a day for a while there.
it wasn't really
And so,
the Muni IT staff, it was really the functional consultants. So the payroll staff, the budget staff, the accounting staff, the utility accounting staffs and so forth. The IT staffs have really been, they have AMS and HEC, they have those relationships, and certainly they put in some hours, I'm not disregarding that, but the people who really put the time in is our subject matter experts in the meeting. We brought on 19 functional areas. There's specialty people in every one of those things. They're not IT people, those are functional people. Those are the ones who've really been juggling 5, 10 things at the same time. And to be honest, you know, just because the system went live does not mean that their level of effort increased. In fact, it's just as much now as it ever has been. And unfortunately, it's probably gonna be several more months before that happens. And you got year end coming up for the first time, and CAPR for the first time. Anytime you do something for the first time, even though it may be happening a few months down the road, it's gonna take, there's a learning curve there. There's a lot of reports that people would like to have to help make their jobs easier that may not have been decided initially. It's gonna take some time to be able to get those things in. It's a process. But that group, unfortunately, if they thought that they, after 6 years were done, that is not the case. We probably need them for 6 years and 6 months, and we're the first month of that 6-month time period. And certainly helping me get cutover done, that's an extra responsibility. Once that's done, they'll never have to worry about that again. So that kind of gets pulled off a lot of the accounting staff responsibilities, but they're not done. They've got just as much work to do, if not more, for some period of time.
thank you.
Anything else? We're about to go into the next work session.
Certainly, just a follow-up. So, one of the questions I always ask in my operations committee meeting is communications and morale. How are people doing? How are people feeling? As you'd expect with a new system, there are frustrations that are expressed. And one of the messages I consistently take to our staff is to take a breath, rest a moment, step back. We're going to get through this, we're going to fix it, it's going to work, and when we do, it's going to provide more for us than we have right now. So, you know, I think the other part of that is appreciating the hard work. I mean, as Alden mentioned, there were people here who were spending
Too much.
The payroll department
all
slept
the
here.
time here.
They slept here a couple of nights.
We're not mentioning that on a recorded thing, because that's really not, we're not allowed to.
Well, they were on their
sleep here,
feet, but
they were working. So that is an enormous effort, and it really speaks to the dedication of our staff, both during the part where we were bringing the project online and going forward. So, I've been very appreciative of that. Ben asking a question about morale. What communication can we put out there to let folks know where things stand and what are the challenges and how we're fixing them and so on. So,
I appreciate that, Robert. The other problem we've got, otherwise, we're being asked by our constituents, so what did you get for $82.2 million? Because they remember when it came in originally at $9.6 million. Anyway, this work session is over with.